While some Americans are currently confused and rejoicing about the relaxing of mask mandates for vaccinated adults, others are still confused about the guidelines from the CDC. And in another big news development, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed a bill into law which intends to curtail a rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans, especially during the pandemic. Hello and welcome. You're watching WION World is One. My name is Priyanka Sharma and this is our special weekly broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production, where we look at some of the biggest stories coming out of America. So our top story in the show: Americans are still grappling with the guidance by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention last week that if they are fully vaccinated against the coronavirus, they can go without a mask outside and inside most indoor venues. VOA's Michelle Quinn explains why the change has led to some confusion. Take a look.
Americans, retailers, and health officials were surprised last week when the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said fully vaccinated individuals could go without face coverings, with a few exceptions. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky says the guidance is about individual responsibility.
If they're vaccinated, they are safe. If they are not vaccinated, they are not safe. They should still be wearing a mask, or better yet, get vaccinated.
Some public health leaders criticize the guidance as too abrupt and confusing, since it's not clear who is vaccinated. The Biden administration has said it won't create a national vaccine passport. The new CDC guidance has revived discussion around a vaccine card so that businesses and others know if people have been inoculated. Walensky says the guidance is not permission for widespread removal of masks, but for each person to take their health into their own hands. For the unvaccinated, the guidance hasn't changed, she said. Last week, U.S. President Joe Biden, appearing without a mask alongside Vice President Kamala Harris, described the updated guidance as a great day for America. The CDC's guidance spurred change throughout the country, with some retailers dropping the mask requirement for vaccinated shoppers. Others say they will maintain their current rules as they review the guidance. A union representing 1.3 million food and retail workers said the guidance could put its members at risk.
What we're asking our businesses to do as they are starting to think about the guidance as to what this means for their workplaces is to make it easy for paid time off for their employees to get vaccinated.
Not all states are ready to loosen their rules, and masks and social distancing are still required on planes and other public transportation. Meanwhile, some states and businesses are coming up with novel ways to encourage people to get vaccinated, such as free train rides, pints of beer, and even money, as they try to return their communities to normal. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
For more on this story, joining me now is Voice of America correspondent Amy Hybels from Washington. Amy, welcome to WION and thanks so much for joining us. Let's begin our discussion by talking about how the states are adjusting to the new guidelines. Tell us more.
Well, here in the U.S., the federal government does not dictate mask requirements. So throughout the pandemic, some states have had mask mandates in place and some states have not. So when this change in the guidelines was issued late last week, those states that have had mask requirements in place quickly embraced the change. Now, here's where it gets confusing. Everyone's doing this on a different timeline. For example, I live here in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. On Monday, our mayor lifted the mask mandate for indoor establishments. But in the neighboring states of Virginia and Maryland, they lifted the mask mandate on Saturday. When it comes to the private sector, businesses have to decide for themselves how they're going to handle this. And as some business owners have pointed out, it's really hard to determine exactly who's fully vaccinated and who isn't because we don't have vaccine passports in this country or even at the state or local level at this time. So we're basically all operating on the honor system. Walmart, the nation's largest retailer, along with Costco and Trader Joe's, have said that they will not require shoppers to wear masks if they're fully vaccinated while they're shopping inside their U.S. stores, as long as there's no state or local ordinance in place that says otherwise. So you can see where this would cause a little bit of confusion, not only at the state level, but among local retailers. Now, fully vaccinated means you're at least 14 days out from your last required shot. Right now, more than 126 million Americans are fully vaccinated, or 38% of the population. The Biden administration has said its goal is to have 70% of the adult population with at least one shot in its arm by July 4th. So it's going to take a while before we know if this relaxing of the mask mandate or the rules really has any impact when it comes to motivating people that haven't gotten the shot to go out and get one.
Right, Amy, since you mentioned the vaccinations in the U.S., just this week, U.S. President Joe Biden announced that the U.S. will in fact share an additional 20 million doses of COVID-19 jabs with the world in the coming weeks. What can you tell us about this development?
Sure. Well, this announcement came on Monday as domestic demand for vaccines has dropped off significantly. At the same time, the U.S. is facing increasing pressure to share its vaccine stockpile with the rest of the world. Now, the doses are going to come from existing production of Pfizer, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson vaccines. The Biden administration, as you know, has already promised to share about 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. That will happen once the FDA clears it in a safety review. Now, President Joe Biden said on Monday that the U.S. is going to be, quote, the arsenal of vaccines for the rest of the world. He also said we will not use our vaccines to secure favors from other countries. The president said while there's a lot of talk about Russia and China influencing the world with vaccines, he said, we want to lead the world with our values with this demonstration of our innovation and ingenuity. So far, the U.S. has shared about 4.5 million doses with Mexico and Canada.
Right, Amy, thanks for those inputs. Stay with us on this special broadcast as we'll come to you for another big story coming in from America. Now, another big development this week. U.S. President Joe Biden signed a bill into law on Thursday intended to curtail a rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The rate of anti-Asian hate crime has soared in the United States since the coronavirus pandemic started in early 2020. VOA's Kathleen Struck spoke with international students in New York City to learn what kind of impact has this had on their lives. Take a look.
Since March 2020, Stop AAPI Hate, a group that monitors racism against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, says it received more than 6,000 reports of hate incidents. Columbia University student June Baek says he came to the U.S. in 2015 from South Korea because of the quality of education.
America offers the best universities, the most renowned ones, and I felt that like going to America, studying there, would open up new opportunities than I would have had if I were to study back in Korea.
While riding the subway last year, he heard a woman begin to shout. That's not unusual in New York City. But he realized it was directed at him.
I tried to not say anything, just look down, just mind my own business, but it got worse and worse, and it became more, it wasn't just any kind of verbal assault, I realized that it was actually directed at me. And I decided to just get off at the next station.
Shootings in March near Atlanta, Georgia, left 8 people dead, including 6 Asian women. While the suspect said his motives were not racial, Asians in the U.S. said the incident has increased their fears. Jessica, a Chinese national from South Africa, graduating from the Parsons School of Design in New York, said news reports of anti-Asian incidents have made her more cautious.
I used to feel really safe in New York, but that hasn't been the case since 2020. For the first time, I feel almost like targeted when I'm walking on the street. It's really sad because I have to avoid going out in the dark. I have to avoid certain streets which are dark. I have to always be very cautious and very aware of my Asian identity.
All the students VOA talk with said they generally feel comfortable on campus and among America's diverse urban populations. They say the experience of living in a multicultural society has been a great lesson.
It's been an amazing journey, especially when I look back. I really got to see so many different cultures coming together, and most importantly, meet friends from different countries, different cultures, and get to know their stories. Really expanded my mind, and I appreciate this kind of freedom for me to explore the world.
But just having Asian features creates anxiety lately.
When I was watching the recent news, I definitely feel really sad to see those attacks happening not only in New York City but also in other cities as well. And sometimes I feel a little bit like unsafe when I'm in this kind of situation. I'm lucky because I've been receiving a lot of love and support.
Kathleen Struck, VOA News, New York.
For a better understanding of President Biden's latest move, VOA's Amy Hybels is still with us live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for staying with us, Amy. Now, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act was just signed into law by the U.S. President on Thursday. What does this new legislation actually entail?
Well, the intent of the legislation is to speed up the review of hate crimes by the U.S. Department of Justice. It's also going to provide some grant funding to local law enforcement agencies to help them improve their investigation, identification, and reporting of these incidents, as they often go underreported. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives, which sent this bill to the White House, voted. That vote was 364 to 62 in this building right behind me in the U.S. Capitol. That was an overwhelming majority. It was a bipartisan vote. They voted to approve this before sending it on to the White House. And the U.S. Senate, of course, voted to approve this on a vote of 94 to 1 back in April. So this really is a bipartisan repudiation of some of the attacks that we've seen on Asian Americans here in this country during the pandemic. Some activists, however, including organizations representing gay and transgender Asian Americans, feel that this legislation was misguided. In a statement to the the Associated Press reports that more than 100 groups have signed on to a statement opposing the bill. They say it relies too heavily on law enforcement and provides too little funding to address some of the underlying issues that are driving this rise in hate crimes.
Right. Amy, can you tell us a little bit more about some of these incidents or hate crimes that have been taking place in the U.S., especially during the pandemic?
Well, unfortunately for many Asian Americans, the pandemic has brought some deep-seated biases to the surface. Remember, former President Donald Trump was criticized for repeatedly referring to the virus, which emerged in Wuhan, China, as the China virus. So as the number of COVID cases began to rise, so did the number of hate attacks. There's also been protests here in the U.S. in cities across the U.S. standing behind Asian Americans, saying enough. They don't want to see these type of attacks or this type of racial bias against Asian Americans here in this country. The group Stop AAPI Hate, a national coalition that's addressing anti-Asian racism across the country, said it received more than 6,500 reported incidents against Asian Americans over the past year, ending in March. Now, while most of the incidents involve verbal assaults, 12.6 of the reports involved actual physical assault, and more than half of the victims who self-reported were women. Congresswoman Grace Meng, who is a Democratic representative from the state of New York, and she's led the charge in the House of Representatives to get this measure passed, said in a press conference this week, quote, Asian Americans have been screaming out for help, and the House and Senate and President Biden have clearly heard our pleas.
Right, Amy,
this
thank you
bill
so
was
much.
signed into law, by the way, during the month of May, which here in the U.S. is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in this country, so probably no coincidence.
Right, absolutely. Amy, thank you so much for all those inputs and insights into these news developments coming in from America. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.